All right, Chapter 11 in the book is on exceptions and advanced file I/O. I am only going to concentrate on the exception stuff, so I'm just going to handle this part right here, which is about half the chapter. All right, so we'll talk about handling exceptions, throwing exceptions, okay, and much of it is stuff that we've talked about before. For instance, an exception is an exception to the rule, so an exception in programming is not a good thing. All right, you use the try-catch mechanism that we've talked about before, and you can have a finally block in there. We've talked about that. We're going to look at all that stuff again. All right. So as it says, an exception is an object that is generated as the result of an error or some unexpected event. An exception is said to be thrown. If you don't handle an exception, the system will. All right. Some of you have seen that kind of stuff already when you try to do something and you get, I think Brady said this on the last test, he was getting a null pointer exception. All right. So if you don't, if there is an exception situation and you don't handle it, it'll keep going up what's called the call stack, and we're going to see that in here too. When it reaches the top, if it hasn't been handled, the program's just going to poop out right there. Java has a lot of built-in exception handlers, and you can create your own. All right, we're going to look at both of those as we go on. So as mentioned here, an exception handler is code that gracefully responds to exceptions. All right, so what does that mean, gracefully responds? It depends on the situation. I mean, for example, let's assume that you've got some kind of an e-commerce site that's got Java on the back end, and somehow the person has made it that far and they have not given any credit card number or anything, and there's no means of payment. You probably don't want to let them continue. Okay, that kind of thing. The process of intercepting and responding to exceptions is called exception handling. The default exception handler deals with unhandled exceptions. Again, what the default exception handler does typically is it'll give you an error, and then the program will stop. Crash the program. An exception is an object. The key thing here, and I'll show you this. Let's see. I have it in here. This is what we're going to be creating in just a couple minutes. We're going to be creating, these are very small files. That's all of it. But it's going to be public class, the name of your exception, and it must extend the exception class. That's one of the reasons that they go over exceptions after inheritance, because exceptions rather extend the exception class. This name can be anything you want it to be. The recommendation from Java is if you create exceptions, you put exception at the end of your exception name. But you don't have to do that. It'll still work fine without it. All right? Now, this is a little bit hard maybe to understand where it says all of the exception classes in the hierarchy are derived from the throwable class, and error and exception are derived from the throwable class. Well, I'm going to jump ahead a couple slides and show you this. All right? So one of the things under object up here is throwable. And notice that under throwable, you've got error and you've got exception. Errors are typically those things you cannot handle. For instance, if you're working on an application and you run out of hard disk space, that's not typically something programmatically you're going to handle. On the other hand, a file not found exception, that's something you can handle. You can tell the person maybe they entered the wrong file name, or that there's no file that exists by that name. But what I'm getting to is right under throwable, you've got error and you've got exception. The error stuff you don't worry about. That's over your pay grade, what you can do, etc. However you want to put it. You care about exception. So basically all kinds of exceptions, whether they're your exceptions or Java's own exceptions, come from under that exception class. That's why you have to extend exception. All right? All right, so those are the error things again. So to handle them, you've seen this before. You put the word try in there, then in curly braces are one or more lines that you put in that could conceivably fail. All right? And then you've got a catch. Now, it's a little bit hard to understand because they don't show it in here, but it is also legitimate down on the bottom here to put in a finally. And there's a reason that I'm taking the time to put that in. I'll just put ... I don't think I've ever seen it in code, but it's not illegal to have a try with no catch, but then it needs a finally. I've never seen that before in actual application code. All right? Not only that, where they've got the catch, you can have multiple catches. You can have as many catch statements as you want to or need to have. That's up to you. But there is a way that they have to be put in, and we're going to look at that in just a second. All right? So again, if I were to go out, just to show you this, and you've seen this kind of thing before, but if I were to go out right here and type in built-in, not each built-in, built-in Java exceptions. All right, that's gonna. I know it's gonna push me. There we go. Well, I can use the geeks for geeks. That's fine. Here are some of the ones that you're going to use most often that they show here. Arithmetic exception. All right. An example of an arithmetic exception, you do things you shouldn't do. Try to take the square root of a negative number. Okay? Type stuff like that. An array index out of bounds exception. You've got an array that you say has got 10 elements in it. You try to access element 15. All right? Class not found exception. I actually got that one here because I forgot to create one of the classes for one of the exceptions that I referred to in the program. All right? File not found exception. We already talked about that. I/O exception. Now, there's a difference between these two exceptions right here. A file not found exception, typically it's because either you put a wrong path name or you spell the file name wrong, etc. An I/O exception might be, I might try to be accessing a file for which I have no rights to access. All right? For instance, and I don't do this, but if I were to try to access payroll information about ranking employees, all right, I'm not authorized to get that kind of information. All right? Interrupted exception, we don't get into that, but the way that Java works is Java can be used as what's called a multi-threaded programming language. All right, so while you're doing one thing in Java that's going to take a while, you can tell it to basically go to sleep and start something else. All right, and if you do that, you can get an interrupted exception. All right. No such field exception, thrown when a class does not contain a field that you're specifying. No such method when it doesn't have the method. Null pointer, and some of you have seen this already. Again, I think I've said this to you, but if I were to do this, literally, if I were to go and imagine I wrote all the other good Java stuff, but I came in here and I wrote int h, just like that, just int h. And then in the next line, very next line, I put in system.out.println age equals plus h. I would get one of those null pointer exceptions. Because right here, since I have not initialized age, it has a value of null. All right? So typically when you get a null pointer exception, you are trying to work with something that has not yet been initialized. Here's one that we're actually going to end up using. Number format exception. Right now, you know this, that if you know, with the programs that we've been creating so far, whenever you've had to input information, all right, for instance, in that date program, did anybody try this? You know, you left the date field blank, or you put in something non-numeric, you're going to end up getting a number format exception. It's expecting an int, and you're giving it a string or an empty string, all right? And that'll even happen if it's expecting an int. So if it asks for a month, and you put pi in there, you know, 3.14159, it's going to blow up and give you a number format exception. We want to be able to handle that stuff. A runtime exception, as it says, any exception that occurs during runtime. So while the program is actually running. And a string index out of bounds exception, which is a lot like an array. The thing that's nice about this, Geeks for Geeks, is they give you examples of most of them. So you can see what they look like. All right? But someplace in here, if I keep looking, there's going to be, I don't know where, but there's going to be the, I don't know, I don't see it here, but somewhere in here, it's got to point back to the Oracle Java site, where I'd be able to go and get information from there. So in the try block, you put in statements that can conceivably fail. All right? Then you catch the possible different types of errors that you could have. You can have one or multiple catch statements. This is known as a try block right here in the blue. This is known as a catch block. So every try block typically has one or more catch blocks associated with it. I don't think I have to read this to you. All right? It's pretty much what I just said to you. Now, one thing about the catch block, and they're going to show this in here, okay? And that is, when you look in here, it says, when you're working with exceptions, what you put in here, that's basically an exception object in there, what you see in blue. So you can say, for example, e.getMessage, and that'll show you the actual message that comes through when you do that. All right. Now, so here's an example of what I just said to you, okay? You can say the following message occurred, but a lot of times what programmers like to do is put this in, the e.getMessage, because what that does is it gives you the exact message that the computer has generated. All right. Now, if you have multiple exceptions, if you look up on the screen here, hopefully this first example makes total sense. Don't ask me why they did this, but if you look up here, notice it says catch number format exception, then down below it says catch number format exception. You can't put the same exception in there twice. If you did that, probably it would be by accident anyway. But the next one, the next slide, is what's important here. These exceptions are in their own hierarchy. All right? So this is actually an error. And the reason that this is an error is number format has to come before illegal argument exception. And the reason for that is the more specific the error, the higher up the hierarchy it has to be. The more general the error is, the lower down the hierarchy it has to be. There actually is, if let's just say I was the world's laziest programmer, all right, then what I could do is I could just put here just this. I could just say catch exception E, and I could just put in that one exception. The problem with that is Java is also lazy, and Java will mark things as exceptions when you don't. It's more or less like it'll flag a warning as opposed to an error. So typically you don't do that, but again, it's not illegal to do that. So if you notice here, the order is illegal argument exception, number format exception, and that's not okay. But if you flip it around, so you put the number format, then the illegal, then it is okay. Again, you can have a finally clause that's typically used for housekeeping type of operations when you get done. It can have as many statements in there as you need it to have. One thing I want you to understand, if you take a look up on the screen here, let's assume here that right here in this code, I've got 5 lines of code. All right, so I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines in here. I'm in line 3, and now something blows up in line 3. Then the system goes down and it tries to catch. Does that make sense to everybody? But once it catches it, it can't jump back into the try block again. You can't do that. There's no go to. So once you leave the try block, you are gone from the try block. All right, you may have seen this before, you may not have. I want to show you something. If you look up on the screen here, I'm going to put in an error in my code on purpose. Okay, everybody see this? I just put in an error here on purpose. And I'm hoping that I put in a good error, and what I mean is when I run this, nah, that's not the error I want. Okay. Maybe you have had this happen to you before where, let's see, go into piece worker here. I don't know if it's going to take that or not either. Wow, look at that. When I divide by 0, it's actually putting an infinity symbol in there. Can you see that? I was hoping it was going to blow up, but it didn't blow up. Of course, now when I want the program to blow up, I can't make it blow up. But maybe this has happened to you before. You've run your program and everything is cool, all right? And maybe you are instantiating a few objects, and then you instantiate one. If you look on the screen here, you get a bunch of garbage that's in here. That's what's called your stack trace area. And it shows all of the different functions that have been called in the program, from most recent, from newest to oldest. All right? And the chances are really, 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 really good that if there's 5 different functions in there, and one of them is yours and 4 of them are Java's, whose do you think is in error? The answer is not Java's. All right? But the point is, when you run through this, as it says, the call stack is an internal list of all the methods that are currently executing. All right? And there's actually more to it than that, but when you go through it, the system, when you see all those different method calls or function calls, that's known as you're winding your way through the stack. All right. In Java 7, they changed it. So in other words, if I was going to do this, prior to Java 7, so I'm just going to put in some code here. All right? So prior to Java 7, you could do something like this. Oops. And even if these two things had the exact same code in them, all right, so earlier you had to put these in as 2 different catch statements. What I'm telling you is if the code right here in line 7 and the code right here are identical. Everybody hear me? If those 2 things are identical, now you could put it in like this. And if you say, I don't get it, guess what? Yes, you do. All right, what I mean is this. It's as if you were writing this. If you remember back when we learned when we learned switch statements, and I mentioned that you don't sit there and say switch on grade, and you don't do this where you say case 90, case 91, all the way up to 100. You don't do that 10 or 11 times so you can say grade equal A. You don't do that because that's too much typing. You use an if statement. But you could do it. And this says for all of those, you want to do this thing. Well, that's exactly what this does. That says regardless of the exception, whether it's this one or this one, do the same code that exists within the curly braces. All right. Again, when an exception is thrown, it cannot be ignored. If it's not handled by you, it's handled by the program. So as it says, what happens there on that last bullet is if a method throws an exception, the system looks and it says, okay, the current routine I'm in, Does it have a catch statement in there that catches it? If it doesn't, it looks at the routine that called that one, and it works its way up the call stack. If it gets all the way to the top without finding anything, it throws an error. That's exactly what they're saying right here. So if it reaches main and it's not handled, the program is halted, and the default exception handler handles the exception. And again, the way that it does is it just stops the program. It blows up or crashes it. There are two categories of exceptions, as it says right here. When I get this out of here, all right, there are unchecked exceptions and there are checked exceptions. Notice unchecked exceptions are those derived from the error class. All right, so you can't handle them. Runtime exceptions are a special class for exceptions that result from programming errors. Those you can handle. Okay? It says these exceptions can be avoided with properly written code. I don't know of anybody who always writes properly written code. Unchecked exceptions, in most cases, should not be handled. All right? Checked exceptions should be handled. So it says here, this method will not compile. All right? And the main reason that it won't compile is it doesn't have anything in there that says that this could possibly throw an exception. And anytime you work with files, you'll have to say something like throws IO exception. Just like that. All right, again, you can write your own exceptions if you don't like the ones that are provided for you by Java. So you can write code that throws one of Java's exceptions, or you can throw your own. If you'd look up on the screen here for a second, please, everybody. All right, in this program that I just showed you, if you remember, if I were to uncomment this, okay, that would say that if I put in a number that was out of range for the price per piece, it would throw an exception. It would literally, you'd get an error message on the screen that would say price per piece must be between these two values. How do I know that? Well, let's try it. I'm just going to save this, and I'm going to run the program again and see if eventually, at least, that comes up. All right, you say there's nothing there. Well, we have to look down here. See that? Price per piece. This was my message. Price per piece must be between 10 cents and $1. This, again, is a stack trace. It's saying that piece worker line 71 was called by piece worker line 27, which was called by payroll driver line 76. That right there is a stack trace. So as it says, you can create your own exception classes by inheriting or extending the exception class, and that's exactly what we're going to do in just a minute. All right, to give some different examples in here. All right, and the rest of this is on file handling. So I'm done with this. So this is what we're going to do. I'd like everybody please to do this. Again, I'm putting everything in this payroll folder. You can see how much junk I've got in here. You may or may not have that in there. I'd like you to come in wherever you've been saving your stuff, do a new, we are going to turn this in, put a new folder in there and just call it exception, singular. Just the word exception. So wherever you're creating your payroll programs, put another program in there, I'm sorry, another folder, call the folder exception and get the path to it. All right, we're going to create a brand new Java program right now that's going to have a class in it called exception. All right. In fact, we won't even call that exception. That's just going to be the name of the project. All right. So if you're in IntelliJ IDEA, and I imagine most of you still are, all right, let me take this and comment it out first. then take the project you had open and close it. Get back to here. All right? You're doing more typing than normal today. The good news is a lot of these things that we type, these files are only going to be about 20 lines long. All right? So we're going to come in here. We're going to create a new project. All right? I just made that folder called Exception. There it is. All right, so that's going to create a brand new project for me called Exception, and I want to go in there. We are still going to work with something that's at least going to be close to payroll. All right, so as we've been doing, we're going to come in here, right mouse click, New, Java class, edu.rankin.jpscott.payroll with a big P. All right, you've seen this before. All right. We're going to come in. We're going to very quickly create about six classes, files, whatever you want to call them. So we just created our payroll. We're not going to put anything in it yet. We'll do that later. But let's come in here. Let's right mouse click again on the name of our package. New Java class. This will now be payroll driver. All right, so that's the second one. So we now have created payroll and we have created payroll driver. What's that? Yes, you're right. This is a good time to come in there and add main. Sure, now when I've got nothing in there, now you tell me. All right, so we now have the driver. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create 4 different exception handling classes. All right, again, these are the files. Each of these 4 will have in the area of around 10 to 20 lines in them, and that's it. All right, so the first one we're going to do is we're going to right mouse click on here, another new class, and this one is going to be called Invalid Hourly Rate Exception. Okay, Invalid Hourly Rate Exception. Please look up on the screen here. You must put after that extends exception. All right, you can put it on the same line, or if you really want to, you can put it on the next line. It really and truly does not matter. All right, but it has to extend exception. So we're going to make 4 of these. That's the first one. Invalid hourly rate exception. So then we're going to come in and make another one. So another new Java class. This is going to be an invalid hours worked exception. And again, you want to say that this extends exception. All right, so that's the second one. The next one, we're going to have a social security number in here, so this will be an invalid Ssn exception. And again, this will extend exception. All right. And then finally, we'll make one more. And this will be an invalid name exception. We're going to make this simpler. We could have an invalid first name and an invalid last name. We're just going to have invalid name exception. Again, make sure you come in here and say that this extends exception. All right. So right now what we have done is we have our payroll file with nothing in it. All right. Our payroll driver with nothing in it except a main. our invalid hourly rate exception with nothing in it, our invalid hours worked exception with nothing in it, our invalid name exception with nothing in it, and our invalid social security number with nothing in it. All right? The reason we're writing these first is by writing them first, when we refer to them in our driver and in our payroll file, we won't be getting red code all the time because they'll already exist. All right? Doesn't matter which one we do first. Okay? Looks like I've got the one up there is social security number, so why don't you bring that one up if you would, please? And I'm not supposing that every single thing that we do in here right now is totally going to make sense to you. All right? But just bear with me, and then hopefully it will. All right? We're literally typing in now 6 more lines of code, and we're done with this one. All right? Public. Invalid Ssn exception. In other words, we're going to write two constructors. So this one, you already know this. This will be our no-arg constructor. All right. So if we pass it with no arguments, we're just going to say here, super invalid social security number. All right. Then I'm going to take all this and copy it. And I'm going to drop it right down below it. All right. And this will be, I'll call this just one arg constructor. And for this one, we will pass in a string with, the social security number. All right. So this will say invalid social security number plus SSN. So in the first case, we won't pass in a number, and in the second case, we will pass in the number. You understand the difference between them? All right. Now, every one that we write is going to look basically like this one. Do you hear me? So I'm going to grab all of the code that I just put in here. So all the code that I just put in between those curly braces, I'm going to just grab all of it, copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to jump up to invalid name exception. All right. And I'm going to come in and paste it in. Now I'm going to have to make changes to it, of course, but all I have to change is where it says invalid SSN, I've got to change it to invalid name. And where here it says invalid social security number, I'm just going to change that to invalid name. This string, I'll just put an N here. And this will say invalid name plus N. So that's all of it. So we've already got our social security number, and we already have our name handled. Okay? The good news is there's not a lot more work we have to do for the other ones. So again, I'm going to come in here, grab all that stuff that's within the curly braces, just like I just did, copy it to the clipboard. All right, I'll come into the hours worked. Doesn't matter which one we do next, but I'm just going to go into that one. And this will now be hours worked. So this will say invalid hours. And this one will say invalid hours plus H. And that's that one. And the rate's going to look exactly the same. The hourly rate is going to look just the same as this one is. Before we do that, if you'd all look up on the screen here for a second, I'm writing one exception that's going to be handling anything bad for hours worked. I could write multiple exceptions. I could write one called hours worked too low and another one called hours worked too high. But I'm just handling all of it with one exception. So we're not writing a ton of code here. That's the only reason. All right, so I'm going to grab again all of this code, come into my hourly rate, and paste that in. That should be a double. And please look up on the screen because I screwed up. Yeah, no, it's the first time ever. But if you look up on the screen here, go back to your hours worked, this should be a double. Because that's hours. It's going to blow up otherwise when you call it. All right? Sorry about that. So hours worked and hourly rate. What doesn't it like here? Unexpected to, oh, I'm missing my other curly brace. So there's that one. So we've now written 4 different exception classes. All right? We're going to go back then and we're going to write the, we'll write the payroll class, okay? And then we'll write the payroll driver so we can try doing the stuff that's in here. The payroll class is not super long, okay? But I made it simpler so we wouldn't have to do a boatload of coding. All right. So if you would please go back to your payroll class, payroll.java, that's right here. All right. And we'll start with declare our instance variables. I'm just having a name, so one name. I don't care if you're Ethan or if you're Ethan Wilson. I don't care. Or you're Wilson. It doesn't really matter. All right, everybody got those 4 pieces of data in? All right, then let's go down and write the constructor. All right, it's going to have a string for the name, a string for the social security number, a double, int I. Why do I put it? Oh, okay. We're just going to leave it like that, just those 2 fields. All right. Now, this can possibly throw, so this throws, well, what can go wrong here? This is the name, and that's the social security number, right? So I'm going to say throws invalid name exception, comma, Invalid Ssn exception. So it's letting me know with this constructor that it's possible that either I could have a bad name or I could have a bad social security number. And if either one of those were to happen, I could throw one of those exceptions. Does that make sense? Again, an exception means it's something that you wouldn't want to have happen. All right. So all I want to do here is I want to call set name, which I haven't written yet, and I'm going to pass it in the name, and set SSN, and I want to pass in S. Now you're going to get red there, and that's fine. You're going to get red there, and that is fine. Why? Because we're about to come in and do our getters and setters. All right? So again, after you do this, I'm going to do my code, generate. I'm just used to this, so I'm going to do my getters first. I want all 4 of these. Click OK. There's my getters. Come down to the bottom. Do another code, generate, setters. Choose again all 4 of them. And now I've got my 4 setters. All right, so I've now generated 4 setters and 4 getters. As always, I won't have to do anything special with my getters. All right? They're just fine the way they are. What I'll have to do my work with is in with the setters. All right? All right. The order in which I do my setters, of course, does not really matter, but I might as well do them in the order I've got them. So there's my first getter, second getter, third getter, and fourth getter. So let's come over to my name getter. All right. I'm not going to do it like this. Okay. I'm going to do an if statement here that says if, and I don't like to use that N there, so I'm going to use N there, and I'm going to use an S there, and I'm going to come down and I'll use a P here, and I'll come down and I'll use an H here. All right? All right. So for my name, I want to check if the name is empty, I want to throw an exception. All right? So if N dot equals the empty string, you know what that means. There's nothing in there. Then I want to throw a new invalid name exception. Otherwise, I want to set the name just like that. What doesn't it like here? Unhandled. Oh, I know that code is correct. Oh, yeah, it is incorrect. Anybody guess what's wrong with this? I have to say up above here. Throws invalid name exception. Oh, not that. Throws invalid name exception. All right, now it's correct. We're going to have to do these with each one. All right. Now, if you look up on the screen here, this is exactly the same as the Social Security number, all that code, except I'm going to change that N up there to an S, and instead of saying invalid name exception, I'm going to call an invalid Ssn exception. So I can come down here and do this. So there's the second one. Again, it looks almost identical to the first one. All right, next will be our pay rate. And we already know we're going to have to put in there throws, invalid hourly rate exception. All right. Now, I didn't put a lot of constants in here. In fact, I put no constants in here. So normally I'd have min rate and max rate, min hours and max hours, but since I didn't put them in, I'm just going to hard code it in. So I'm going to say if P is less than 0 or P is greater than 100, we're assuming that's what you can have in there for your pay rate. Throw invalid hourly rate exception. Oh, yeah. Otherwise, it's equal to P. Pardon me? I need parens here. And you need a new. Yes, you do. Thank you. Again, those 0 and 100 I just made up on the spot. Normally, we would come in here and put in fact, we would probably normally have an interface file which would have those constants in there. All right. And then finally, the last one that we have is our hours worked. Sorry, that's not 840. If you can work 840 hours in a week, there's something wrong with you. All right, it should be 84. One more thing we have to do and we're done with this class. Then we only have to write the driver and we're finished. Now, it doesn't sound like anybody's really typing, or not very much. If you look up on the screen for a second, do you realize the only thing we're checking for is a number out of range? This program is still going to blow up if I put an alphabetic value in there. Did everybody hear that? All right. We'd have to catch that with like a number format exception or something else. All right. So that's it for... That is it for the actual payroll class. It's time to do it for me to do a file save all. All right, and I'm going to come over to the driver. And you know what we have to do in the driver. This is where we're going to test everything. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I did leave something out. We don't have to do this, but since we're putting in hours worked and we're putting in hourly rate, why don't we do a gross pay? All right. We won't worry about overtime or anything. We'll just do a very simple one. So on the very bottom of your program, we'll put here public double get gross pay, and we'll just say here return get hours worked times get hourly. Oh, we have a get hour. Oh, it's get pay rate, isn't it? Okay. That should be everything. Hopefully one thing you're noticing is these, when you write in an object-oriented way like this, you get a lot of methods, but they're very small by and large. All right? And since they're very small, even if you have a lot of them, your classes tend to be fairly small. All right? If you set it up, you have a class hierarchy and you prioritize, etc., you can write some really good, crisp code. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the driver here, and I'm going to say payroll, I'll just call it worker, equal new payroll. Okay, in fact, I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to say payroll worker right there. So that's creating a new object, but that object has nothing in it. Does that make sense to everyone? It is a null object. All right. So now I'm going to just come in and I'm going to do a bunch of try catches. So what do we have? There was nothing in there for the name. We'll put in a social security number. And let's see, what does it like here? Unhandled exceptions. Okay, it's because I don't have a catch yet. Catch. In fact, I don't want to catch that. I'm just going to say, well, I guess we can do that. And I'll just say system.out.println okay, still doesn't like something. Unhandled exception. Oh, okay. See how smart this system is? Please look up on the screen here, just so you see how smart the system is. I'm still getting an error. Why? Because it's telling me, look, you can also have here an invalid social security number, and you're not accounting for that. So I've got to catch that one too. Now it looks like I have nothing that's wrong, at least. So I'm going to save this, try to run it, and see exactly what I get on the screen. All right, didn't do what I thought it would do. Okay, it did give me an invalid name exception, which was good, but it didn't call my exception. All right. I'm going to try something. Don't change yours yet, but let me just try something, okay? I'm going to comment all of this stuff out. The bad news is I'm working off an old program and I'm rewriting it as we're doing this. I shouldn't be doing that.
I think there's a Java naming thing exception for invalid name exception. So,
That could be.
because I think that's why it says Java naming.
All right, let me double check this. So let me run it now. That's what I wanted to say. All right. So what we're doing here, I'm just telling it to catch any exception. By doing this, I don't have to do catch this and catch that. Now,
See, that's what I was talking about.
right here,
Yeah, you get rid of that.
yeah, there.
That whole thing, because when you probably were autofilling.
Yeah,
probably
it put it in for me.
Java one
You're right.
instead of the regular
Just commented out.
So try that
right.
and then put your.
I can put the other one back in, yeah. This is going to handle it, though. The way it is, it's going to handle it.
Yeah.
All right? So if I come down here, I'm going to just grab this whole block that I've got, and I'm going to put it in again. Oops. I'm going to paste it in all over again. This time I'm going to put a name in there, but I'm going to leave out the Social Security number. All right? So the first time, it came in and it told me exactly what the problem was. It said it was null. And now it's telling me invalid Social Security number. All right? That's exactly what I told it to say. Now, if you notice, because I tried to make this simple, please look up on the screen here. What didn't I add? I never even added these things into my constructor because I'm going to let you do it. Just so you get some practice. So in other words, take these two fields, add them into your constructor, set up a set and a get for those. Actually, you've already got those. But then go back in again to your driver and check that stuff out too. All right? Because it's one thing for you to be keying in a lot of code, but it's another thing for me to take you part way. It's like having you learn to swim, and then once you feel like you're a pretty good swimmer, then I take you out for a boat ride and throw you in. All right. So what I plan on doing tomorrow, this is all I had done for today. I didn't know how long it would take. So what I plan on doing for tomorrow is we're going to go back to that program we just wrote. Not this one, but the one we just wrote with all the classes in it. Everybody hear that? And we're going to make a boatload of exceptions. Okay? In fact, try to think of what you'd want for exceptions. Okay? Some exceptions are going to be generic, right? Everybody has a first name, a last name, and a social security number. All right? Everybody has that. But piece workers have two things that could be bad. Weekly or salary people have one thing that could be bad. Hourly workers have two things that could be bad, etc. So we're going to write exceptions for all of those tomorrow. All right? Now, I'm going to suggest, and this is but the last thing I'll say, if you look up on the screen, when we do this tomorrow, all right, I'm hoping I'm going to have time to do it first, all right, because all these I've done already, but I didn't do that one, so I'm hoping we'll have time. I'll have time, but in case I don't, I'm going to suggest that, yeah, that's all good, fine and dandy, but that you take your program that we just finished before the last break and you copy that folder in case we fudge it up. So you've got one to go back to. All right? I would actually, do that right now. Even if it's just called the same name, copy. That's fine. right? So I'm going to give you some time to take a look at this. And again, just about everybody, there's one or two of you who haven't turned in the homework yet. But what do we have for homework to turn in for this time? So for chapters, what was it, 4 to 6 or whatever the heck it is? I guess 4 to 9. I want you to turn in, there's 2 OOP programs. The first OOP program that we did, so OOP 1, and then OOP 2, which was the one that had arrays. All right, then the palindrome one. All right, so that'll be the 4 through 9 stuff. What you're going to turn in for this next one, for 10 and 11, all right, is this program that we have on the screen right now that we called exception. The one that we did before, which was our payroll inheritance. Bless you. And then we're going to have payroll exception. And it's not impossible that you might combine these 2 into one program. And if you do that, that's fine. Then you'll only turn in 2 programs. When we go through chapters 12 and 13 next week, there'll only be one last program. Actually, there'll be 2. We're going to write a simple calculator, and then we're going to go and rewrite this whole flaming thing that we've got and try to make it GUI. All right? And I haven't done anything GUI with IntelliJ IDEA other than take other GUI ones that I've written in Eclipse and drop them in there, and it appears to work just fine. But I'm going to try to investigate that this weekend. All right? So my hope is, I'll take your question in a second, but my hope is by the end of next week, everybody hear this? By the end of next week, by a week from Friday, we will be totally done with the regular Java stuff. All right, so if we have one last test, it may be that following Monday, that's fine. But then come the 6th of February, we'll be into Android. All right? Yes, sir. Question?
Can I just do this?
What?
It takes the first one, but it sees.
Yeah, yeah, they're at the same level, so yes, you could.
Okay.
Yeah. It's actually a better way to write it than the way I wrote it.
Isn't the way we coded it, it's supposed to say the include item next to it too? Or just all these have the plus what was.
We're not doing it.
Yeah, but when you're throwing the exception, you've got to throw it. You've got to add. You've got to pass that to it too when you throw it.
Oh, right here?
Whenever you know. Yeah, I would say get message. I don't know if you have to do a plus or what.
We need some of that.
And actually, you're right. But the way that I showed you was the way that most people write it. But that said, when I looked online and was looking for a bunch of stuff, even though most people do that, it's almost never that people actually pass anything in. So even though they do it, I think they're doing it to show you that you can overload because they're just constructors. But I didn't find any examples where anybody used the other one. There's probably a way to do it, but I'd have to look it up.